I honestly can't believe it, but it's been 10 years now since The Elder Scrolls Online first released. I still vividly remember playing the game during beta testing back in early 2014, going through those starting zones as a stealthy bow and dagger wielding Khajiit, trying my hand at soloing world bosses, which were actually somewhat challenging at the time, and hiding in the shadows near cave entrances in Cyrodiil waiting for unsuspecting players as I attempted to burst them down while they were still loading into the game. You know, the good old days. But yeah, man, it's been 10 years since ESO launched, and in that time, the game has remained a staple of mine. It is one of the MMOs that I enjoy revisiting each and every year. I like coming back, loading up an old character, or even starting a new one, and checking out all of the latest content. I like that I can enjoy much of it solo, leveling up and going through the new zones, and then grouping up if I'm in the mood for farming dungeons or doing PvP. I also like that I never feel too far behind when jumping back in, as the game's got a relatively horizontal power progression. Every time I come back, I can pick up where I left off and not feel terribly far behind. While the general structure of each year's updates tend to be very similar, it also offers a new part of Tamriel to explore, new dungeons and boss mechanics to learn, and typically there are one or two new game systems to try out as well. For ESO's 10th anniversary, this remains true. The Gold Road chapter launches soon on June 3rd for PC and June 18th for Xbox and PlayStation, and comes with all the expected content along with the new edition and game system of scribing. Bethesda is sponsoring today's video. They asked me to show and share with you some of the new content and features that are coming in Gold Road, and I've been playing through the update over this past week, giving it a look, checking out all of the new content there is to see and do, and we're going to be checking out all of that and talking about it here in this video. But before we dive into that though, I want to take a quick look back just as a reminder to how the game has changed and evolved over the years. So when ESO first released in April 2014, the game included several playable zones for each of the three factions. In those zones, you would find content like points of interest, these numerous locations scattered around the map that either tie to the main story or side quest, all of them fantasy themed with the Elder Scrolls sort of locations that you might expect. Those were all present here. Then there were the delves, these explorable like mini dungeons with some narrative element and typically a boss at the end, as well as public dungeons, significantly larger and more complex than the delves, with bigger groups of enemies. You know, delves might have like 2 to 3 enemies in a grouping, whereas the public dungeons could have 5 to 7 with some elites thrown in, and there would typically be like 3 to 5 bosses in each of the public dungeons as well. They were almost like traditional MMO instance group dungeons, but fully open instead, so you could walk in and you could just see a group of like 10 people running around. Then there were world events in the base version of ESO. These were specifically called dolmens. There would be several dolmens in every zone, and the game would cycle between them which one was active. When a dolmen was active, as soon as a player walked nearby and attacked these NPCs that were doing a ritual, the event would then begin. Chains would slam down from the sky with hordes of Daedra enemies summoning in, and a big boss at the end after you filled these containers with the Daedra souls. There were also straight up world bosses, very challenging open world enemies, either one tough enemy or a group of enemies. These usually required a group to complete, or if you were very well geared or skilled, capable of kiting, you might be able to do the boss mechanics and solo it yourself. And they had the regular straight up dungeons, traditional MMO content. These were 4-man groups going into instance locations to clear packs of elites and fight challenging bosses, all for the sake of loot. And then there was usually a major town or city in every zone with vendors, story NPCs, and crafting stations, and every faction also had its own capital city in one of the zones as well. So at release, every zone contained all of that content. The points of interest, delves, public dungeons, world events, world bosses, group dungeons. You would follow the main story quest, moving through each zone in your faction's territory, checking out all of that stuff as you progress the story and leveled up. Then when finishing the story, you'd arrive at its culmination in this place called Cold Harbor. This was sort of like an end game location. It was at the very least the end of your main narrative arc. At that point, the game said, hey, do you want to play as a spy and sneak behind enemy lines going through the other faction zones? To which the answer was, duh, more content. So this would move you into the post-leveling system of the veteran ranks, and you would go through the experience of clearing the zones for the other factions. In addition to that, there was PvP content, which came in the form of Cyrodiil, one massive open zone where the game's 3 factions would fight for control of territory, capturing towers and points of interest, attempting to push the other 2 factions back. I adored this at release. This was some of my favorite MMO PvP content ever. I just really liked the scale, the number of players, the castle sieges, but then also the small scale stuff, like with me sneaking behind enemy lines, trying to capture points while everyone was distracted at Elsweyr, or hiding in stealth in bushes waiting to pick off stragglers as large groups roamed by. It was a heck of a lot of fun. I really liked Cyrodiil. And that was more or less ESO at release. Do the main story quests, move through the zones, level up, then start progressing the other zones at endgame, climbing veteran ranks while farming for gear, which would either be weapons and gear sets found in group dungeons, overworld sets, or learning the traits to craft your own gear sets as well. And if you enjoyed it, as I did, there was a lot of fun to be had in Cyrodiil's PvP. Then after that launch version of the game came the updates, with the new content additions each and every year in the form of DLC and chapters. Most of the chapters in particular have always added at least one brand new playable zone to explore with all of the expected content. These areas again would have a new story, and you'd move through the zone going through the points of interest delves, public dungeons, instance group dungeons, doing world events, fighting world bosses. But then also in the chapters as well as the DLC, there's been additional new features and types of content, like different ways to play the game, new systems added to the game that's happened over time. So let's check out that. In 2015, about a year after the game launched, we got the Imperial City. This opened up a brand new PvEVP space, the city districts and the sewers. So you would go here to farm enemies for the special currency in exchange for gear, but also players from other factions were hanging around as well, and it had open PvP. So things got a little crazy, and at times keyboard smashing, because if you died, they could actually steal the currency that you were farming for. How fun this was really depended on what end of the equation you found yourself on. 2015 brought us the zone of Orsinium as well as the Maelstrom Arena. This is really cool. It was a single player challenge trial where you would fight through these increasingly difficult waves of enemies and challenging bosses for some really good loot. And I mean really good stuff. Very strong weapons in particular. These are things that are still viable to this day from content that came out in 2015. In 2016, we got the Thieves Guild, and this wasn't just a thematic NPC faction to speak with, but a new thief-related mechanics were added to the game. Unlocking the Thieves Guild skill line offered new tools for sneaking and thieving. You could pickpocket and steal items that you would sell to guild fences. There was a bounty system where if you broke the law, you would get a bounty, so you'd have to be careful about not attacking NPCs in town or to get caught stealing, or else you would get a bounty. There were also daily heist missions asking you to sneak into warehouses or homes to steal very specific items. And all throughout the overworld, thieves troves were added, and if you found one, you would loot it for valuables. Also in 2016, we got the Dark Brotherhood update, letting us roleplay as mercenaries. This opened up a new repeatable quest line to take out specific targets for rewards, and the Dark Brotherhood skill line, which unlocked the Blade of Woe, which is basically an execute ability to quickly eliminate your targets. Then 2016 brought the very big one Tamriel update, bringing major changes to the game. This completely overhauled the open world, removing level restrictions to zones and enemies, and making most everything scale to the player. This also removed alliance restrictions for grouping, so you and a friend, even if you pick different factions, you could still play together. With this world scaling, level differences between players also no longer mattered, making grouping easier. And this made all of the open world content relevant again, no matter your level, because the zones were no longer level tiered. Any place you went would still offer good experience and good rewards. One Tamriel also included the addition of player duels, and brand new ultimate abilities were added for every weapon skill line. Some of these very good and still used to this day. Come 2017, they added player housing with the Homestead update, dozens of homes with thousands of items to customize your space. There was a new crafting system to go along with this, allowing you to build furniture. 2017's large update was Morrowind. This also kicked off what became a new yearly content update structure and schedule that has continued to this day. So this Morrowind update added Morrowind, letting us explore the island of Vardenfell and return to Vivec City. We also got our first new class, the Warden, with nature-based magic and a war bear combat pet. This has been one of my favorite classes ever since. It's still the one I like maining today. I like the nature magic theming. I like my war bear following me around, tackling enemies. I like casting frost spells, commanding insects, and hurling flying cliff racers at people's faces. I like coating the ground with sheets of ice and summoning ice spikes, invoking a bird spirit for large movement boost. The whole class, its theming, its playstyle, I find a real lot of fun. Also in Morrowind, they added battlegrounds, which are what you expect. It's a new way to PvP. These are small scale, 3 teams of 4 versus 4 versus 4, battling inside of instanced arenas, trying to compete to be number 1. Also, they added Clockwork City here in 2017. Moving Moving on to 2018, the big update was Summerset, which brought us to the home of the High Elves. This added the Psijic Order skill line with abilities related to time manipulation, like time stop, letting you freeze time in a bubble, meditate to focus and quickly regenerate health and resources, and undo, an ultimate that rewinds time 4 seconds, returning you to that period in time's amount of health, resources, and moving you back into that position. We also got jewelry crafting to make rings and necklaces, and they added the Murkmire region, a swampy area of the Argonians' homeland. In 2019, we got Elsweyr, the Khajiit homeland. This update focused on dragons, with a lot of dragon-themed locations and content. Dragons would be flying around the zone and sometimes would land, allowing you to kill them. This was basically the new public event for that region. And we got the new Necromancer class, which can raise the dead, curse its enemies, and do sort of other necromancy stuff. This is like the one class I'm least familiar with in ESO, but if you like necromancers, summoning minions, and cursing things, that will be the one to go with. The Greymoor chapter came out in 2020, bringing us to the homeland of the Nords. We could finally explore Western Skyrim, as well as the subterranean depths of Blackreach. This actually takes place 1,000 years before the events of Skyrim, mind you, so it's a tad different than what you might remember from that game. We got the Antiquities system, a new treasure hunting mini game for some pretty good loot. Actually, some of the most unique items in the game are achieved through engaging with Antiquities. You basically find clues to buried treasure by completing challenges, defeating difficult content, farming certain enemies. You take those clues, it shows you on a map where the treasure is, and then you actually go manually to excavate it yourself. We also got Harrow Storms. This was the new twist on public events, these supernatural vampire-themed storms. And then later in 2020, they added the region of Markarth, a new playable area, as well as a new solo arena to check out. 2021, we got the new zone of Blackwood with the Blackwood chapter, including the Imperial city of Leowyn and the bogs of Shadowfen. This also introduced the companion system. These are allies that you can just go out and do combat with. They'll follow you around, they'll help you out. If you're a healing class, you can get a DPS one, you can get a tank one, you can get a healing one to support you if you're a DPS or tank. It just gives you a basic constant AI companion to join you in your travels. They also added the new world event of Oblivion portals here. Then 2022 brought High Isle, with the new zone being the High Isle of Ominos and the Island of Galen. We got a new collectible card mini game in the Tales of Tribute. That's right, a CCG within ESO. And the new world event styling was these volcanic vents. And then last year in 2023, we saw the Necrom update with the Telvanni Peninsula zone. This brought about the Bastion Mimics, a new type of world event, actually quite different than the ones that came before it. So this had you collecting a special material that drops from these Seekers, which are like elites that roam around the zone. And then once you have 5 of them, you open up a portal to the Bastion Mimic, and this has you fighting through encounters until you defeat a final boss, which has 3 different variations. Pretty interesting, repeatable content in these Bastion Mimics. It also introduced another new class, the Arcanist, that has access to these destructive, restorative, and defensive magics by channeling arcane energies, summoning ancient runes, and lost tomes of powers, which then brings us to where we are today, here in 2024, with this year's big update being the Gold Road. So the narrative focus here is that a new Daedric prince has arrived in Tamriel. We need to figure out what she's doing and why she's here. Hint, it's probably not for good reasons. It's a Daedric prince after all. So I've been playing through this update recently, checking it out early in the PTS. I've explored through the new zone, seen some of the new content, and done some of the new things there are to do. So here's what you can expect to see and do in Gold Road. So the new explorable zone is called Westweald. This is an Imperial region last seen in Oblivion, which is now threatened by the encroaching Valenwood jungle and Daedric incursions. The zone is made up of a couple visually and thematically distinct sections. We'll investigate the wilds of Dawnwood, explore ancient Ayleid ruins, and the mountainous highlands. When you first arrive in the zone, you'll actually find yourself in the highlands just outside the city of Skingrad, and you'll be surrounded by these yellow, orange, and red tinted trees. Much of the zone, in fact, has this autumn look and feel to it, but not the entire thing, because to the west is a pocket which makes up maybe about 1/4 of this zone, though I wish it was a little bit bigger because this is my favorite section. It is a dense, thick woods with massive trees and overgrown plants. It actually reminds me a bit of Grotwood, which hands down is one of my most loved MMO zones ever. I love the deep, large trees, huge, overgrown, jungly, foresty area. It's just my favorite type of zone in MMOs. those, and I really like Grotwood. I really like this new section of this new zone as well. In this part of Westweald are goblins, large forest creatures like lurchers, lizards, and trolls, and the occasional Daedric threat, of course. While in the Highlands, you're going to come across, in this autumny region, bandits, ogres, all sorts of wildlife, and yes, more Daedra are there as well. No matter where you are, though, the zone is full of all of the usual suspects, all the content you expect. There are points of interest, castles, towns, ruins, and camps, all tied into either the main or side story missions. This includes an old keep overrun by Daedra you have to infiltrate and clear out, a tiny town deep in the forest with quarreling citizens who need your help, and ancient ruins infested with wood elves hiding a dangerous secret. There are, of course, new delves and public dungeons. The delves include the usual variety of caves, caverns, and other interesting bite-sized locations to explore, like a lumber camp, dilapidated castle, and mountainside fort. Then there's the public dungeons, which are a bit more expansive. One of them, called Silorn, are these old ruins that have been infested by a cult of necromancers. There's a side quest that asks you to enter this location and collect ethereal shards by completing memory puzzles scattered throughout. While inside, moving through its halls, you'll come across groups of necromancers and their minions, with skeletons, zombies, and geist, along with this pack of minotaurs. There's a handful of boss fights, some jumping puzzles, obstacles to avoid like wire traps, pendulums of death, and falling debris. The public dungeons, along with the delves, continue to be some of my favorite content in ESO. For as straightforward as they are in terms of content type, I just always have a good time clearing and farming them for gear. There are new world bosses, which in our experience have been quite difficult. This includes Fang and Talon, a pair of manticores who leap around, attacking with swipes, bites, and shooting lightning. They're accompanied by an elite goblin troop at the start of the fight and summon more throughout. At one point, they actually split up, where Fang continues to chase you around while Talon jumps into a corner and then starts shooting out projectiles of black smoke that spread across the arena, dealing a ton of damage. This attack is called Bad Breath, by the way. I know that because I died to it a couple of times. And there's the other world boss, Spinner Earthrender, a druid of sorts that's found standing inside of a tree grove, casting a ritual. Besides basic attacks, he also shoots a cone volley, summons various wildlife, and places thorns on the ground. There's a phase of the fight where he creates illusory mushrooms that fire projectiles and wasps that chase you around. You have to guide the wasp by luring them into the mushrooms to destroy them. And then in the final phase, all of this is happening at once. You've got the boss attacking, wildlife ads chasing you around, mushrooms firing projectiles, and then a damaging ground effect that takes up over half the arena, moving counterclockwise. There's a new world event called Mirror More Incursions. Like other world events, this is a variation on the dolmens. So there are 4 possible event locations spread throughout the zone. You'll find one of these active at any given time. When you head over, what you're going to see is this giant shattered floating crystal above the event platform. Extending out from there are these beams of light, reflecting and shooting shards in 3 different directions. Following one of those projectiles will lead you to this crystal shard formation with a boss surrounded by ads. First, you have to clear the ads, and then the boss will leave its protective barrier. You kill the boss to collect a shard. Repeat this for the 2 remaining bosses to collect the additional shards, and then this starts the main event. Back at the platform, a crystalline creature named Rarvok is summoned in. He does a bunch of different area attacks along with summoning in ads. He will then periodically move to the center where he becomes invulnerable, casting a row of tornadoes that continuously moves around him, while also then summoning one of the 3 bosses that you fought earlier. So you damage the boss, it then summons in the next boss, and then you do this 3 times. It makes the main boss vulnerable once again, and then he does this and for a second round, but instead of summoning the other bosses one at a time, you actually have to fight all 3 of them simultaneously. Killing them will then move you into the final phase where you fight Rarvok, however you pronounce it, with a ton of area effects going on, bunches of stuff to dodge, targeted spells and abilities you have to leave, and then twice as many tornadoes spinning around the center. This is one of the more thorough iterations of these zone events, certainly far beyond the public events that we had for ESO when the game originally released. Just much more involved and has more elements to it. While doing all of this, you'll come across new item sets, both craftable and looted, as well as collectibles, including mounts, pets, and new skill styles, which are visually distinct versions of existing skills, which is a pretty cool addition as it lets you tweak and tailor the skills that exist already in the game to make them appear a little different visually, depending on whether or not you've unlocked the ability to do so. And then, yeah, of course, there's 2 new endgame dungeons. There's also a brand new endgame 12-player trial. And the big new additional content, though, is the scribing system. Here they say you'll delve into the heart of magic itself yourself with scribing. This is a unique system that allows you to customize your playstyle in new and exciting ways. You'll collect special skills and then modify their effects and functionality to make them yours. With scribing, you have the freedom and power to play your way. The TLDR here is that basically scribing gives you access to abilities and types of mechanics that you might not have had prior. So say, for example, if you're playing a class that doesn't by default have a offensive or defensive power-up, you could get it through the scribing system. You could get access to a stun, you could get access to a heal, to direct damage, to crowd control abilities. In addition to all of the other skill lines that are already in the game, you've got your class skill lines, the weapon skill lines, the guild skill lines, the world skill lines, all of these different skill lines. This new edition of scribing just opens up more potential variety and access to new things, new tools in your toolbox that you might not have had otherwise, and it is looking really cool. I didn't quite get far enough to fully explore the scribing system, but on its face, it sounds like a great new addition to Elder Scrolls Online. And as always, I have gone back and done what I typically do when I revisit ESO or any of my favorite MMOs. I'll jump back in, play through the new content, check out the story, explore the zone. In ESO in particular, I like going through the delves and the public dungeons. That is just my favorite content. It's pretty simple and straightforward, right? They're just like little dungeons, but I really like how they're done in ESO, and I always love going through each and every one. I usually don't bother too much with the game's vertical progression because the game does a good job in ESO. You can be pretty set with just a regular set of purple overland gear for a lot of content other than the highest, most difficult stuff like trials. The game just has a nice, pretty flat horizontal progression that makes it easy for me to jump back in and mostly experience all the new stuff, I guess, barring the trial. Maybe I could do the trial as well if I found a group of people, but yeah, I like how they do it here because it does make it easy to return and not feel like I'm far behind or behind at all whatsoever. And then I'll make some progress on things like I'll maybe engage with the antiquities system to try to get some of those really rare items. With this update, I'm going to keep playing, you know, it's the PTS now, but once it goes live, I'm going to play on my main account and engage with scribing and try to unlock as many of those abilities as possible. I'll do some dungeons, I'll do some PvP, and then I'm usually pretty happy after a couple of weeks, and I'll just wait until the next update happens. I'll come back next year. That's what I usually do. I like what I've seen so far, and I'm looking forward to checking out more of it once it officially releases on June the 3rd. That does it for this video. Thanks as always for watching, and thanks again to Bethesda for sponsoring this. If you guys are interested, you want to check out ESO for the first time, or to come back and see the new update, check out my link in the description below. But that is going to do it for today's video. Thanks again as always. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.